Welcome back to the Mandarin Blueprint Podcast. My name is Phil Crimmins. Today's podcast, we're going to cover the comments and questions that came in this week as per usual. But first, some updates about the course and our progress. So, regarding the vocab boost lessons in the intermediate course that I've been talking about, the reason they're not out yet is because we've run into even more delays on the intermediate course stories, and so we want to get those done because we've been working on those for so long. Just, little things you keep discovering, little areas where it's like, oop, this was, recorded incorrectly, or there was a problem with the text that needs to be re-recorded, and so there's just some of those things going on. And then the text tracking is on its way, so hopefully that'll be done very soon. I know I've been saying that for a while. We just keep running into delays with it, but once that's finished, then the vocab boost lessons will soon be finished after that, at which point our assistant will be able to help us finish creating level 58, which will be the final level of the intermediate course, and cover everything through the HSK3. Now, I've been focusing most of my time on finishing out the order in through the advanced course. So yesterday, I just finished putting together a preliminary order through character number 2,500. So we're now almost to 1,000 more characters on top of what is already published in through the intermediate course, which is 1,530 characters. So we're doing well. We're going through, and there's 514 characters to go until we've covered all the characters in all the vocab through the HSKs 1 through 9. Now, we'll probably add more characters after that because the HSK covers all these characters doesn't mean there aren't other characters that are worth learning. However, we'll probably maybe cap it at 100 extra characters or 250 or so. Basically, we're going to add in the most frequent 100 characters apart from the HSK. So that way you're not, the HSK isn't just like everything that could possibly be known about Chinese. And when I'm getting to this level, it's very interesting sort of seeing the vocab that gets unlocked and, what kind of detail you're getting into. It really is advanced stuff because many of the words that you're unlocking are very situational. It's like this is a word that applies in just a very few number of situations. And so it's not, they're not as essential as they would be otherwise. But as I've mentioned many times before, the reason you want to know these characters is because infrequent words come up all the time. They just don't come up repeatedly. So when you're reading any bit of text, you're going to see word combinations that you've never seen before, especially if you're reading something, say, you're reading the news, which is always going to be somewhat situational. It's going to be like, there was a flood in Zhengzhou, or there was a COVID outbreak in Nanjing from the airport, or there was a meeting between U.S. diplomats and Chinese diplomats in Tianjin. These are all relatively recent news events. And each of them is going to have vocabulary in them that are directly related to the situational affairs of the moment. However, the vast majority of those words contain characters from the top 3,000. So even though it's a combination you may not have seen before and that you won't see again for ages, it's still easy enough to understand when you have the characters understood and you have the surrounding context of the article understood. And so it's this kind of cool thing that happens when you reach a certain advanced level where it doesn't matter that you haven't studied the word in an academic setting and gone, I've learned this word properly through the Mandarin Blueprint Method, because your foundational knowledge is so strong that you just make the connections yourself. It's really a beautiful thing when you get there, which actually relates to something else that I wanted to chat with you guys about, which was a recent conversation that we had with Rebecca and Christine. So they both live in New Zealand and they're study buddies. And so both Luke and I had a chat with them, I guess it was about a week and a half ago now. And it was really interesting. We're going to publish it soon. But the one takeaway that I wanted to share with you here is that there's definitely a point in the intermediate course. It's hard to say exactly where, but there's a point in the intermediate course where keeping up with the sentences can start to get a little bit overwhelming because you learn new words or new characters, and that unlocks more and more new words the further you get into the course, because the amount of characters you have to match things up with is more. So if you're at character number 100, the analysis we'll do is how can character number 100 combine with characters number 1 through 99 to create high frequency words. And that's not so many, because it's only 99 characters and it's only focusing on the top 1,000 words. So it's only going to unlock one or two. But when you get into the intermediate course, say you're at character number 1,200, then we're saying, what are the words you can create between characters number 1 and 1199, and how many words does that unlock in the top 4,000, right? So there's just a lot more words that can be unlocked, and this is that intermediate plateau where there's just a lot of vocabulary that you got to pick up on. And at some point, the sentences, and of course there's also it's not even just the words, it's the words and all of their different usages, which means there needs to be at least one sentence per usage, and so it can start to get overwhelming at some point. Now, I definitely don't want to discourage people from feeling like they're reading loads of sentences in Anki, because the meta effect of doing such a thing is that you end up getting a very solid grammar foundation. Your grammar foundation, and it's no one sentence makes you feel it, but like having all those sentences really makes a huge difference. The people I know who've gone through all of the intermediate course sentences who we've talked to all say that their sense of grammar and their ability to read has gotten really good. But they also all say there were points where it felt like, dang, there are so many sentences to do. So here's the takeaway that we had from this conversation with Christine and Rebecca, which is that at some point, sentences from new vocab in the Mandarin Blueprint Method, somewhere in the intermediate course, should start to become reference and optional. Now, exactly when this is, we may have to decide. We might want to pick a point. Maybe it's level 50 or something. But at some point, you want to start looking at them as like, hey, the real key here is to get your characters going. Keep getting to that 3,000 point, especially once the upper intermediate course and the advanced course are out. The key is just to try to get those characters under your belt. And then going back through the Mandarin Blueprint materials and reading through, like, especially the long form content, and maybe there's a particular word that you want to make sure that you have down for the HSK. It's like an HSK word and you still don't quite get it. Well, you can reference the Mandarin Blueprint sentence for it and be sure it's comprehensible for you. But there's definitely a point where you've gotten the grammar understanding under your belt. Like, that's there. It's totally, you've had enough sentences to build up your grammar foundation, but you're not yet to the point of having all the characters you need. And wherever that point is, which is a bit subjective, that's the point where you really want to sprint on the characters and get those under your belt. Now, so we'll figure out exactly when this is, but the point is, that's why I'm so focused now on finishing the character order, because if we can finish the character order, by Black Friday, which is our goal, then you guys are going to be in great shape to get to that advanced level of Mandarin that you need. And then you can go back to the other materials, and it can be much more reference-based. You can be like, let me read this article, let me look at this sentence for this particular word, and it'll still be highly valuable to you, but it'll be coming from a place of your character foundation being solidified. So it's kind of this interesting thing where the process of growing into your Mandarin understanding is, it goes through these phases where different things are important. So obviously at the very beginning, pronunciation and character components and characters are the most important. Then learning words are really important. And then you go into this long phase of sentences and grammar being super important. And it's not that it doesn't remain important, it's just that you reach a peak of grammar being important, and then interestingly enough, characters start to become the most important thing again, after having been, always important, but maybe not the sole focus of getting your foundational knowledge down, but it definitely comes back. And then, of course, once you've gotten your characters sorted out through the top 3,000, then it becomes read, listen, and then activate as much as you can by speaking and writing. So it's a beautiful thing. I love it. I love doing this job. It's such a great thing, and you guys are the best possible group of people on the course ever. And so it's a pleasure for us to do these podcasts and to communicate with you all throughout the week. I mean, like, it's just these, it's important to spend some time to be grateful for what you have if you are in a good situation. And Mandarin Blueprint is in this great situation where we have such excellent, members and people who are communicating with each other and being study buddies and talking to us and giving us great stuff to talk about on the podcast and in our Loom videos and to make new course content. So I love all of you. You're the greatest ever. So let's get into some of the questions and comments for this week's podcast. First up, we have Chris Lewis on Make a Movie for Joe. And the comment is actually not too related to that particular character. So let's just get into it. He says, just wanted to make 2 points here that I think separates this course from any that I've ever taken online over the years and a fantastic model. 1, your team is incredibly organized both mentally and technologically to save links/bookmarks to all that is re-asked. You must get the same questions over and over again as people move through the course. With what I can see, with ease, you are quickly able to answer our questions with patience and kindness. 2, I love hearing my name in the podcast. That is special for me. Although our Mandarin is not as good as yours yet, it shows the willingness and courage to include our comments and hopefully help others to further their creativity. I know I gain from others' comments, and sometimes I just can't think of a living link. It's one of the best business models I've seen. You guys are very humble, another great strength. Yeah, I'm super humble. I'm the humblest. I'm the most humble person that's ever existed. No, I'm just kidding. Thanks so much, Chris. That's a very... It's very nice of you to say. I do think that, a lot of it just comes out of necessity. You think of, we're a small business. We've had a sort of innovative idea, but it's very, tricky to navigate the waters of a, online landscape. But it's the kind of thing where, if you have something like, okay, we get a lot of questions, but we, can't necessarily afford at various points to hire a huge customer service team. So we need to find ways of being more efficient. And so it was like, oh, well, the technologies that are available today are incredible. It's like, Loom is just this quick video maker. Like, you just sort of highlight somebody's, a part of your screen where somebody has left a comment, and you answer that comment, and you just click end recording, and it just opens up a web page to an already uploading video that you can then share the link to. And it's so efficient. And then we just keep them, organize them by FAQ, and just have a big sort of warehouse of questions. And then, I do have bigger plans for those FAQ questions as time goes on, but essentially it saves us a lot of time. And all that exists because somebody made another awesome online, sort of useful tool. And it's one of those things where we couldn't even do this 5 years ago. And the new technologies that are coming out all the time, I know that the world is facing a lot of problems and that, not everything is very rosy. But when you're in the position that we're in, it's just like you see a lot of the good that's happening in the world today. And, it's always a mix, and we always have to be keeping vigilant. But I also think it's important to recognize when things are, sometimes getting better in certain, sometimes niche arenas. But the fact that 2 guys like Luke and I can make an online course relatively cheaply it just means that the opportunities for people are expanding, and there's opportunities for people to make something of themselves without necessarily having to get involved in just massive corporate entities or the government or whatever. I mean, obviously everything touches those areas, and the different things that we do definitely have to do things like use internet, and then that internet company's huge or whatever. But still, though, it's really cool, and we're very excited to have this opportunity. And yeah, thanks so much, Chris. We really appreciate it. Next, we have Annette by email. She says, "Hello, Phil and Luke. I just bought the lifelong membership as this is the best bang for the buck. I do clearly see that compared to the other offers, and having seen what else is out there online, and the costs, and knowing what you are working on getting courses to the highest proficiency levels too. Where there is a will, there's a way, and I decide to find the money. I figure if this is what I can enjoy doing for years to come and eventually use when visiting China, then it justifies dipping into my personal savings to make retirement so much better and something additional to the RVing to look forward to. I've chosen to look at it as an investment in securing an interesting retirement. Scientists say to keep the mind active, and learning a new language is one of the best ways to do so. I'm excited to deep dive into this project. I've been using the free trial and was blown away by the thoroughness of your lessons, right down to having the Anki card set up to meticulously follow the videos. You really do make it easy for students. I did the pronunciation course first. Makes sense to do it up front. Same as I did when I learned French, Italian, and Russian, so no surprise it's what you do first. These pronunciation cards will be something I will go back to over and over again. Pronunciation is not learned overnight. My biggest issue listening is the chi versus ji, but I found in many, not all cases, the chi has a longer, more buzzing sound, and I was finally able to hear the nasal sounds in the ing, ong words that I couldn't in the videos. I had to laugh at hearing the bird initiating the fourth tone in Detre. Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, one side note on pronunciation. Growing up bilingual with Danish and German, lived in Denmark but spoke German at home and when visiting family in Germany, I went to the German school in Copenhagen. It never occurred to me that certain consonants and vowels were difficult to pronounce until I went to a regular Danish high school. The German school at the time did not have a high school. There I witnessed my fellow classmates having such a hard time in German lessons with the open A. Danish uses a closed A, or a mishmash of closed and open. The ability to pronounce SH sounds and a sharp Z. Yeah, so these are different German sounds. That was my first eye-opener to appreciate the adage that the more languages you know, the easier it is to learn another one, which is true. Russian has a variety of S to Z sounds, and I find I hear that with Chinese too. I wonder why you were referring to problem sounds, or I wondered why you were referring to problem sounds in the videos, and realized after watching most of them that you refer to strictly unilingual English speakers. Perhaps labeling them as problems might set some people up to look at things as really difficult rather than if it were a challenge if you ever revise the videos. I have the impression you have members from all over the world speaking a multitude of languages. Yeah, and just I'll comment on that before I finish reading the email. It's kind of one of those things where if we were to suppose we were to try to make it work for every language, that would be kind of a huge amount of work for something that is, for the most part, many of our client base at least know English, even if it's not their native language. There's also a little bit of what do we know? I mean, both Luke and I are bilingual. We know Chinese and English, and so Chinese is our second language, and so we can't really comment too much on other languages. It's not our area of expertise. So certainly we could make it clear that this is based on English to Chinese. I mean, to some degree, that's kind of implied considering the lessons are in English, but nonetheless, though, when we do say these are problem initials, we're saying they're problem initials from the perspective of a native English speaker. Just kind of how like saying the, chu chu shu, those are considered problem vowels, problem finals, chu chu shu, if you're an English speaker, but if you're French or German, those sounds exist in French and German, so like it's not so hard in that case, or at least the U sound does. Continuing with the email, she says, I'm working my way through the first lessons, trying to follow the imagery you suggest, although tweaking them a bit because I do not like gory as in the razor blade or syringe, too many traumatic memories related to my health, and was happy to have found comments/podcasts that deal with people who have varying degrees of difficulty imagining the visuals. It's the details that give me a bit of an issue. I have some trouble seeing the facial expressions. I try to exaggerate the movements of the actors to express the emotions instead. I just have to work at it and am encouraged having read/listened to the comments and podcasts. Also, the podcast with Rebecca Webble, where she said she had started with Duolingo, gives me encouragement, as this is how I started too, but got a little tired of the repetitiveness and restrictive, sometimes awkward English translations you have to put in, not to mention the same sentences over and over and over. I look forward to getting to a level where I can read the chairman's bow being a bit of a news junkie. I would also like like it if your company gets an agreement with Do Chinese as you talk about it in a podcast or a comment. I have looked around that website too. I'll be aiming for the ultimate goal of watching TV shows without caption and the ability to communicate my thoughts freely in Chinese and understand responses. Looking forward to years of fun, Annette from Annette. So great. This is an excellent attitude moving in. I like the ending there because, of course, it is years of fun. It's not like, learning Chinese, learning Chinese is like getting married. Right? It's like you're going to be with this language for the rest of your life. You're going to have contact with this language for the rest of your life. And so you might as well enjoy the ride because it's never, there's never really a moment that that you've become fluent or literate. It's kind of something that works its way through. And eventually you go, okay, I've reached it somehow, but like it wasn't a finish line, as it were. But you've got a great attitude going in. Chairman's Bao is awesome. Do Chinese is awesome. Maybe we can find ways to work with them in the future. I think that there's a lot of possibility there. Duolingo, Duolingo is a lot of people's starting point, and it's not a bad starting point, but it's certainly not comprehensive enough to continue with. It's not like you can use Duolingo from scratch and get to absolute fluency, but it can give you a bit of a little jump start. We've had a lot of people say, I came from Duolingo, so we're grateful to Duolingo. It's a good thing that they have a Chinese section because it sends a lot of people our way. Excellent stuff. And by the way, you mentioned Chinese TV without captions. You'll never get it without Chinese captions because one interesting thing about China is that because of all the different dialects, TV pretty much always has the Chinese written captions. I mean, of course, if you're learning Chinese, having Chinese captions just makes it all the better because you're watching and reading at the same time. But it's because there are so many different dialects. So, like, take, for example, in Fujian province, that's one of the dialects in Fujian are very different from Mandarin. Fujian is in the southeast. It's kind of like across the strait from Taiwan. So if you imagine a map of China and you can imagine where Taiwan is, Fujian is right across the strait there. And the dialect that many people speak there, they also, for the most part, speak Mandarin because pretty much everybody does. But it's so different from Mandarin to here that, if you only knew the Kejia is the name of one of the dialects there. If you only knew Kejia, then, listening to Mandarin wouldn't be comprehensible to you. But if you can, the written language is still shared. So that's amazing in a way. It's like the written language can be used for such different spoken languages. And so if you're watching, some Chinese TV show that was recorded in Mandarin and you're in Fujian, you can still understand it because you can still read the captions. So essentially all Chinese TV shows and movies have captions hard coded into the movie itself or the TV show itself. So luckily, though, they don't have English hard coded into it, so you won't have to worry about relying on a language you already know. Next, we have a comment from Giles on Make a Movie for T. Asked a teacher for help with both meanings. How's this? 我想提到你提着的公文包. So this is great. She uses both forms of T to illustrate the different usages of T as a verb. So T can mean to bring up, like bring up a topic, and it can also literally mean T as in pick up something and hold it to your side. You'll notice it has the finger component in it, so it's like kind of gives you that. That's what you do. You hold something at your side, and that's what you do with a briefcase. A briefcase is perfect for that because you don't put a briefcase on your shoulder, you don't put a briefcase on your back, you tee a briefcase. So she says, 我想提到你提着的公文包. And so the first one is I want to bring up the suitcase or the briefcase that you're carrying. And why would you do that? Well, maybe, and I pointed this out to Anne, like maybe you're at an office environment and somebody is carrying a briefcase in, and on the briefcase they have a bunch of stickers on it, and some of the things on it are not safe for work. I don't know. There's like a naked lady on it or something. And so you need to bring this up to the person. You need to bring up the briefcase they're carrying. So it's bring up and carry. Those are the two versions of T. And the reason you need to bring it up is because there's something on it that they shouldn't have. So you need to bring it up as a topic of conversation. Because at first when you read it, it's like, why would you need to bring up as a topic of conversation someone's briefcase? And so it's like, make a little mnemonic and come up with, well, there could be a reason. Imagine that they're, it's, or maybe it's all tattered, to give a little bit less of a racy example. It's just, you shouldn't have such a tattered briefcase in the office. We're professionals after all. So that's a good way of coming up with the differences in usages there from Anne. Next, we have Annette on Make a Movie for Wu, which means noon, like 上午 before noon, 中午 right in the middle of noon, and 下午 afternoon. Okay. Would this work? I previously had the plus sign as a giant plus sign, but I hear that you can adjust it somewhat to fit the movie. I'm still trying to figure out the movies. In this case, the famous scene from High Noon is the template. Worf from Star Trek sees the loser Donald Duck entering the living room of my childhood home carrying an item shaped like a metal plus. Donald Duck has a temper and immediately challenges Worf to a duel. Worf thinks this is ridiculous. He reluctantly agrees to the High Noon challenge, saying he will only use his batleth against Donald Duck's metal plus. Metal against metal. The clock starts ticking toward noon. No sooner has the clock chimed noon, and Donald Duck finds himself balancing on top of the metal plus, having been defeated by Worf. So this is a great scene overall. There's a lot of elements that are very sensual. You've got the sound of the ticking clock. You've got it chiming at noon. That's very good for the meaning. There's only one minor thing that I would say could be confusing. Now, first of all, when I say could be confusing, I mean, it may not be. You may have no trouble remembering the scene and no problems whatsoever. But since we're early in the course at this point, it's worth considering, being a little bit hypercritical in order to make sure that you get the basics of how this works. So the one issue is the batleth. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but Worf is carrying a batleth to do his high noon battle against Donald Duck, but that batleth doesn't represent anything as far as I can tell. We've got the giant plus is what Donald Duck is holding. Donald Duck himself is the loser component at the top. And Worf is the actor, so Worf is supposed to be there. The living room of the childhood home, that's the final, because there is no final. So that gives you, and living room gives you third tone. So we know that, and we know the components, and we know the meaning because of clock striking noon and there being a duel at noon. So that's all there. The only thing that is representative of nothing is that batleth. And so if you were trying to remember your movie, like you got to your Anki card in a couple of weeks and, noon, pinyin, wu comes up and it says, all right, write this character. You might remember the batleth and think, what was that batleth representing? And the fact that, it doesn't represent anything could be confusing. Now, like I said before, it may not be, because sometimes, the scene is so good that the extra prop didn't matter and it didn't confuse you. But it's just one of those things that if you were being strict about it, you'd say, well, the batleth doesn't represent any element of this character, should therefore be removed. But still, though, great scene overall. You're definitely getting the broad strokes of the method for sure. Next, we have Jeff Johnson on Make a Movie for Wang, which is the character for king. Guo Wang is the full word for king, but Wang by itself it's also a very common last name. This was a fun one for me. I chose to have the scene be a king's coronation. Further, as a special guest, I have a friend named Wang. His driving is infamous among our friend group. Seriously, don't get in the car. So it not only made sense with his name, but it gave an extra reason for the crowd to cheer extra loud at the end. Kings did not drive themselves, after all. See, I love that personal connection. You know somebody who's bad at driving. They happen to be named Wang, which is the character of the pronunciation of this character. And then you make a connection to, kings don't drive themselves, of course. And so everybody would celebrate that. It's hilarious. So that's the type of stuff you're definitely going to always remember. So great stuff there from Jeff. Next, we have a comment from Chris Jensen on Make a Movie for Fei, which is the character for fly, or to fly. When doing my Anki, I realized I didn't recognize the icicle component of this character. It looks quite different. I'm sure I'll remember going forward, but I found it a bit odd. Yeah, you're right to notice that the way that the icicle component, it's flipped around and it's on the other side, and it kind of looks like little wings in this case. But the thing is, it doesn't come up like this very often at all. Like, there are other minor incidences of it in the advanced course, but it essentially doesn't come up again for ages. And so do you make another prop for it when it's really just the same prop flipped? It's up to you. You could, but it's probably unnecessary, especially because Fei is such a distinctive looking character. I don't think that you'll have much trouble with that. And so we didn't decide to make you think of a new prop just for one character in this case. So that's what we came up for there. So what you can do as a technique, if you are worried about remembering it, is just to say to yourself, okay, how about I make the icicles or the ice skates look different in some way? Maybe they're flipped around in some way, or something is added to them to remind me, okay, they're written differently. Maybe the positioning with the other component could work well for you there. Paulette J on New Vocabulary Unlocked for 认识. She says, I speak French, and it uses different verbs for knowing information versus knowing a person. So it was helpful for me to mentally link 认识 to the verb, and it's a French word here that I'm not going to try to pronounce, but because I'm sure that I'm totally off. Then she says, I think Spanish has the same verb distinction. And yeah, if your native language has this type of distinction, because, one of the problems with translation in general is that languages all have sort of different distinctions that they draw. So there are areas where English is more specific and will draw distinctions where Chinese doesn't, and then there are areas where the opposite is true, and this is one. But, that could be like how much overlap there is. It's not like, French and English are completely overlapped and they have all the same distinctions. Of course not. So there are going to be moments where Chinese and French have the same distinctions and English doesn't. So yeah, totally use your native languages if you happen to know more than just English, which is probably a lot of you. So yeah. Bubu on level 13 complete. Oh, finally, I'm able to complete level 13. It was super awesome that I could read out all the sentences and understand every one of them. I am just thrilled and excited to move on. Thank you, Phil and Luke, for your awesome teaching and guidance. Don't know how I could have gone this far without you. Well, you're doing a great job to get through level 13. Level 13 is, of course, the first level with sentences, and you understood all of them. That's excellent work. Excellent stuff. I'm so happy for you. And hey, you're the one walking the path. We might have mapped out a path for you, but, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. You're doing a great job getting this far, so fantastic. Casie Moen on New Vocabulary Unlocked for 今年. I have intermediate level Korean literacy, and so the first thing that pops out at me when I consider these two characters is related Korean sounds and words. Jin is one way to say real or true in Korean, which is interesting enough because jun in Chinese. There seems to be a bit of a phonetic connection there. And then one of the Korean words for year is derived from the exact same character as in Mandarin. Interesting. But is pronounced nyon rather than nian. So the only real year we have is the current one we're in. The rest are just fictions of the past or present, or I guess past or future. A mnemonic for the Mandarin by way of Korean. See, I love this. We've got people making connections from French in this episode, people making connections from Korean, and so it just goes to show learning multiple languages can be very helpful in that. We had the German and Danish connection from earlier in this episode. This is an episode of laddering. So laddering is when you use your second or third languages to learn a further language. And so if I, move on to learning Spanish, which will probably be the language I try to learn, because I may be moving back to the United States next year. And so if I do, then I will want to learn Spanish because it's second most spoken language in the country. So when I do that, I will for sure connect Spanish to Chinese. And that might seem wild considering that Spanish has more of a connection to English, but it helps you maintain your connection to your second language. So it's a good thing to do. Next, we have Chris Park on Simple Final U. 不，我不渴，我饿了. Thanks for A, asking the questions, and B, answering them. I had exactly the same questions, and pleased to find the answers already posted. Great course and great feedback. I really just left this comment in the podcast to remind people that, like, if you have a question and you do not see it answered below, please ask, because it's exactly for this reason. It's you leave a question, we answer it, and it's there existing in the comments section for future people. You're paying it forward, and so please don't hesitate to ask any questions. We're more than happy to go through them. Karma Senge on Make a Movie for Ren. Do you think I need to make a movie really about this character if I've known the meaning and pronunciation for years? I did all the rest, scene, props, actor, etc. So I have the stuff paid out for future characters, but I really don't think I need a movie for this one. Yeah, sure. That's what we tell people. We say, if you know for sure a character and you know the pronunciation, you know the tone, and you know the components and what it means, and there's no doubt in your mind about any of those, then just go ahead and skip the make a movie lesson, because you don't need it, and you don't have to unsuspend the Yankee card either. So that way you can, just be saving yourself some time, right? Not everybody is coming in here with Chinese starting from absolute scratch. So if you're one of those people who's in that situation, then don't worry about it. Just move on. But you're right to make sure you have the props and actor and sets and all that, as they will pay off in future characters. But yeah, no need. Casie Moen on New Vocabulary Unlocked for 说话 and 电话. It is really fun to notice the similarity between Korean and Mandarin in some of these initial vocab words. The Korean for a phone or a telephone call is pronounced jonghwa. I'm sure that I'm not pronouncing that correctly, but where jonggi means electricity in Korean, so different sound in the Mandarin, but same morpheme meaning, and the hua deriving from the same character, hua, and having a very similar pronunciation as the Mandarin. Fun to piece some of these things together, and very useful for mnemonics as I learn Mandarin moving forward. And so, yeah, this is another great example. If you have a language under your belt that has some kind of connections, then all of these are possible connections. To some degree, mnemonic learning could be simplified as just saying mnemonic learning is the art of connecting your previously known facts about the world to new facts. And so if you happen to know Korean, then the connections that you'll have to Mandarin are more and more. And when I learn Spanish someday from Mandarin, there will be some sounds that sound a little bit like a Mandarin word, and I can make connections there. So excellent stuff. It's awesome content this week. Chris Lewis on 拍照 in context. In this sentence, I suggest combining your and self into the word. Taking a picture of yourself is called 自拍 in Chinese, and selfie in English. Yep, self picture. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. It's a very straightforward word in that sense. Chris Lewis on 照相机 in context. I cannot remember how many lessons ago it was said, but we were told, again, that we will notice when a character, for example, 一台, is a measure word and not some random character. Your lessons are sinking in. Of course, when I looked it up in Pleco, it said all of the following. For certain machinery, apparatus, instruments, a typewriter, computer, tractor, a stage performance, a modern drama, and a song and dance. Interesting combination of things. Yeah, so the reason we point out that measure words, you don't need to put too much effort into trying to learn them, is because the grammatical structure of a measure word is very simple to understand. The way you learn measure words is you just learn Chinese characters, because the grammatical structure is straightforward. One, they're pretty much always one character. There might be some exception to this, but for the most part, measure words are always one character. And so what that means is that you have a very straightforward structure. Number, like 一, or liang for 2, or san, and then measure word, and then noun, right? So number plus measure word plus noun. So obviously at the beginning you learn 个, so like 一个人, one person, 三个人, 3 people, right? But you don't necessarily at that point know all these other measure words. You don't know all these other measure words, but you can see that same structure later with a different measure word, like 一台照相机, 一台照相机, meaning one camera, right? And that once you have that, you see that, you go, well, a 照相机 is a noun, and clearly we have a number here, and then we have a character in between. Well, that probably is the measure word. And then you read, and you see this pattern over and over and over and over and over, and then the next thing you know, you just recognize when there's a measure word. And then you start to just associate them, and then you have this thing where you're speaking and you use the right measure word for something, and you're like, how did I do that? Well, you did it because you saw the pattern and your language module turned on. So it's good stuff. Robert on 长的 in context. He says, hi Luke, thanks for the real life use and description about 长的. At this stage, phase 4 beginning, I'm starting to try and get the memory working better with words. HMM for characters, but now the challenge is words. What I found here is that your description of real life use of the words gives a nice living picture of its use. I find it easier to write the lived experience in my Anki deck when I have you explaining it like you did here. Thanks. My feedback is I find the videos like this in the vocab and context format where you give your real China experience are excellent for getting the memory loaded into the brain. Awesome. And to Robert, I would just say that if you're in phase 4 now, you may have already been past phase 2 before we updated our content to focus on the living links side of the course. So a living link is the type of thing you do to remember an individual Chinese word of 2 or more characters, and we give a bunch of great examples of how to do that. We have a vocab mnemonics cheat sheet that you can download from the beginning of levels 7, 8, 9, or 10. The first lesson is a conceptual thing about how to remember words. But of course, you're at a point too where learning through context can help a lot as well. So thanks for the feedback, and if you want to check out any of those, just head back to phase 2 and check out any of the new Vocabulary Unlocked lessons. We updated them a few months ago, so you might want to check those out if you haven't already. Rick Angleland on Vocab Unlocked from Pao Bu. He says, and I found Pao Bu Ji, which is not a high-frequency word, but easy to learn. Right, so if you were to guess, Pao Bu means run, and Ji means machine. So a run machine, well, that's a treadmill. So it's pretty easy to learn. There are a lot of things like that in Chinese. So Rick is right to point that out. Kairi Shikari on Vocab Unlocked from Li, which is meaning ceremony. He says, in what kind of situations would you use Li Bai Tian rather than something like 星期日 or 周日? They all mean Sunday, right? They're just 3 different ways of saying Sunday. Li Bai Tian. Li Bai means to worship, right? So the Li Bai Tian is kind of more based on the idea of, Sunday worship. Maybe it's a bit of a Western idea to some degree, integrating its way into Chinese. However, it's really they all mean the same thing. You can say all of them. Li Bai Tian will sound a little bit more formal, but it's not wrong. People will understand you, and they won't think it's weird. So essentially, that's the situation. I would say all 3 of them are the same. There's not too much of a difference. Chris Lewis on Pai Zhao in context. According to Pleco, these 2 things both look the same. Is there much of a difference? Pai Zhao and Pai Zhao Pian. Really, they're the same. The Pai Zhao is just a abbreviation for Pai Zhao Pian. So Zhao Pian is an actual picture. So you're saying you're taking pictures, and then that just gets abbreviated to pai zhao. Pian is any kind of like thin thing, like yi pian mian bao is a slice of toast or a slice of a picture, like a Kodak picture you can imagine, and or a Polaroid picture. And so that's a pian, that type of object. And so a zhao pian is the pian that is of something that got illuminated, something that got, it zhaoed is the way to think of it. And that's so you pai zhao pian or just pai zhao, either way. George J on 自己 in context. He says, a quick question. 我早上自己吃饭，下午和儿子吃饭 versus 我早上一个人吃饭，下午和儿子吃饭. Would sentence 2 also be correct? Would there be any difference in meaning or emphasis in this context? I've always seen 一个人 as meaning alone / by myself and 自己 as by myself / without anyone's help. Is that about right? And yes, exactly. You've pretty much nailed it. So if I'm saying 我早上一个人吃饭, the point that I'm emphasizing is that I was by myself. I was one person, 一个人. But then the other one 我早上自己吃饭 is like emphasizing that I did it without anybody's help, and so I did it in that way, and it's not that, there's some overlap, of course. There's always the, sense that you could say it that way, but it's better if you want to emphasize that you're alone to say 一个人. It's pretty easy to think of too. It's just like, I, one person, eat food. So it's very, Chinese can sometimes sound caveman-like when you're directly translating it. Gavin Meakin on 女人 in context. Following on from the thread above regarding 我是个好女人, if omitting the e is common versus, so like basically 我是一个好女人 versus 我是个好女人, if omitting the e is common, what about omitting 一个 altogether? Does the meaning change if I were just to say 我是好女人? And so yes, so if I read 我是好女人, it's like you're saying a proper noun. I am good woman. I am the good woman, right? It kind of feels like you're saying, like maybe there's a superhero called Good Woman, and so that's what you're saying there. But once you add in 一个, you're measuring it, and that's kind of like saying I am a good woman. This is going to sound weird if anybody takes this, cuts this podcast out of context, but I am a good woman is the 一个. The 一个 represents like how we say a in English. So that's kind of the distinction you'd make there. If you take out the 一个, it just sounds like you're saying some proper noun in that way. Nice. These are great questions this week. I love it. Next, we have the vocab living links for this week, and these are the connections that people are making to individual vocab words of two or more characters to something in their memory, some kind of mnemonic connection. It could be a sound, it could be a connection to the definition of the word, and many of the other things. As I mentioned earlier in the podcast, the living links, we cover how to do living links in phase 2 of the course, which is starting from level 7 through level 12, and all of the new Vocab Unlocked lessons there have videos we released a few months ago that are really getting into the details of this. So essentially, we're coming up with ideas to connect to these different words. So first, we have Hajna on Vocab Unlocked from 回来, and 回去. And she just says back to the future. So 回来,回去 just means return back or come back, and so or go back. And so yeah, it's Back to the Future is a perfect connection there. And I've always thought Back to the Future is such an interesting title for the movie because, of course, they go back to the past in the movie, but for some reason they say Back to the Future. And so that is another little layer of it that can make it interesting. Next, we have Hajna again on Vocab Unlocked from 因为. And she says, Wizard of Oz, because the wonderful things he does. So yeah, of course, that's a good connection too, because is such a abstract concept that if you can connect it to something like a song they sing in The Wizard of Oz, that's perfect. Jason Pan on Vocab Unlocked from 意, which has a bunch of different words. 意思,介意,同意,有意思,没意思,不好意思,注意,做生意, and 意外. And so he looks at some of these and he says, EY, Google image search, unexpected pregnancy. I'm sure you could find some there because that's an EY. EY is something that happened outside of what you meant to happen. So E means meaning, Y means outside. So EY is like an accident or a mishap or an unexpected thing that happens. Next he says, 注意到. 注意到. So 注意 means to notice something or pay attention to something, and 注意到 means that you successfully noticed something. And so he says, picture of someone noticing something at a bar, and he particularly landed on Ryan Gosling at the bar in Crazy Stupid Love, which is a movie I haven't seen personally, but it's the perfect type of connection if you remember a scene from a movie. So excellent stuff there from Jason. Claire Murphy on Vocab Unlocked from 有人,只有,没有,有点,还有,有的,有用. And she says a teenager in the UK in the 80s. It has to be Yazoo and Only You, or the Flying Pickets version. So that one, totally over my head. Don't have any connections to those personally, but that's why I love this course, because Claire, clearly from the UK, and, perhaps was a teenager in the 80s. And so, yeah, that's That's the type of connection that I'm so glad people post, because it's, the type of thing that'll make sense to somebody else, but I would never have been able to make it in the first place. It's awesome. George J. on Vocab Unlocked from 几个十几几百几千. He says 几个. These are a few of my favorite things, from Julie Andrews on Sound of Music. And just another comment on 几 here. So you have 几个, meaning a few. You have 十几, meaning somewhere between 10 and 19. So it's still an estimation, hence why we use 几. But because we're putting 十, then we know it's somewhere between 10 and 20. And then if we wanted to say between 20 and 30, we would say 二十几. And if we wanted to say between 30 and 40, we would say 三十几. So it's really simple to point out where your estimate is. So, how many people are over there? 那儿有多少人? And you say, 那儿有40几个人. So 40 something, around 40. Right? Somewhere between 40 and 50. It's usually above, but you get the idea. Then we have 几百. So 几百 is a few hundred. And then you have 几千, which is a few thousand. At this point, you're kind of making the estimate to some. It's when you get into larger numbers, you tend not to be quite as specific with the estimate, even, because it's just big enough. It's like, okay, there's a few thousand people there. 几千. So nice. George J. on Vocab Unlocked from 机, 手机, 飞机. And he says, those magnificent men in their flying machines movie. So, yeah, because 飞机 is literally flying machine. And so, obviously, that means airplane. But if you have a movie that actually talks about flying machines, then, you have a perfect connection there. But, it's funny because Chinese, sometimes the word itself is clear. It's like the flying machine. It's like, yep, that's clearly an airplane. So, good stuff. Kim Thomas on Vocab Unlocked from 新闻. 最新新年. And so Kim says 最新. I chose an image of a concept car, right? Because that's of course going to be the most new. 最新 is the newest, the most new. And for this one, the other two words, you have 新闻, which 新闻, I like that word because it's like that which has most recently been sniffed out, which is the news. So 新闻 is the news, and 闻 means to smell, or so you can imagine that which is we sniffed out most recently. And so that's kind of cool there. And then 新年, that's the new year. I mean, there's lots of associations with New Year. Party hats, those in the noughties, like if it was 2008, everybody had those glasses that had the two eye holes and the two zeros. So it's 2004. I'm going to wear those glasses. And then you have the New Year's ball dropping in Times Square. There's all sorts of connections you can make to 新年. But of course, I like this idea of for 最新, you have a concept car. You can imagine the Tesla Cybertruck. That was a pretty interesting one there. Kim Thomas on Vocab Unlocked from 亲, 母亲, 父亲. And for 母亲, he chose Mother Teresa. And for 父亲, he chose Father Time. So two good connections to mother and father there. And excellent stuff. Scott Wishart on Vocab Unlocked from 算, 总算, and 打算. Swan song for finally, right? Yeah, it's a great connection. So 总算 means finally. And, a swan song is somebody's sort of final the final act of their play, their swan song, whether you can imagine it metaphorically as well. So that's a great connection there. Awesome. And swan song, 总算, swan song, swan song, it's kind of good little connection there. I like it. Gregory Savage on Vocab Unlocked from 饱, 吃饱. And he posts a link to a Monty Python meaning of life skit. And he says, the meaning of life with the fat man overeating, saying, I'm full, then vomiting till his guts spill all over the place. Ah, such treasured memories. Maybe you had to be there and 23 to appreciate it. But no, I loved all the Monty Python stuff. And I'm, so that's a perfect type of connection for 吃饱, to be so full that you've eaten and you're just completely full. And, obviously that scene will be a perfect type of connection for that. Chris Lewis on Vocab Unlocked from 担 单身 and 简单. I can't speak for others, but I love dancing 单身 as a single. 简单. GN, it's so simple. Dan is our man. Yeah, Dan the man, Dan is our man. GN, Jian, Dan, GN, Dan, right? So it's like kind of that connection to all those different sounds there. Great stuff. Chris is awesome at those. He's really, really good at the vocab living links. Robert on Vocab Unlocked from 定, 一定, 决定, and 不一定. He says, I like to visualize a game show in progress. When the host reveals the contestant is correct, you hear a 定 to confirm that they got it right. Yeah, sure. That's a good one. And also, 确定, which is not a word that unlocks yet. That unlocks when you learn the character 确. But 确定 means to confirm. So, like, that's even better for this type of connection as well. Awesome stuff, Robert. Rick Angleland on Vocab Unlocked from 客人 and 不客气. He says, I think 客人 also covers what we would refer to in English as a customer at a restaurant or a diner, etc. Yeah, it can be. So like, but you'll still use 客 for these. So one way to say a customer is a 顾客. That's the guest you look after, the 顾客. And then there's also 客户, which means client. So that's kind of more in business settings and not necessarily at a diner or something. But still, though, 客人 could still work. But just bear in mind the reason it works is because 客人 is generally thought of as being a guest in your home. But if you're being a diner, you're like, oh, it's like such a good home environment. It's like it's like our guests here because it's like they're at home. But they're kind of making that connection there. So yes, you could still use it, but it's because of that. It's making a connection to the initial meaning of being a guest in someone's home. Rick Angleland on Vocab Unlocked from 路, 马路, 走路, and 路上. Forrest Gump jogging 跑步 across the USA 路上. Right, so that's a good reference to the Forrest Gump scene and also a reference to the previous word from a lesson or two before this, which is to run. And of course, you always 跑步 on the 路上. Well, I mean, not necessarily, but like a lot of people do. They'll run on the road. Curtis Castonguay on Vocab Unlocked from 有, and he says, 有人. For those who have seen the movie Ferris Bueller's Day Off, the boring teacher in the classroom, played by Ben Stein. Anyone? Bueller. And so, yeah, that's a great one. So, 有人 is like, this is what you do when you walk into a shop and nobody's at the counter or whatever. You can say, 人呢? Or 有人吗? You know, like sort of kind of, is anybody here? And then, of course, you can also ask a group of people, 有人喜欢这个吗? Right, you know, so is there anybody who likes this? You know, so that's a quick way of asking, does anyone, or is there anyone, or anyone, Bueller. So great stuff there from Curtis. That'll wrap up the living links and the questions for this week. Thank you so much for watching as usual. We love all of you. You're the greatest. The Mandarin Blueprint Podcast is such a joy to do every couple of weeks, and we'll see you next week here with Luke, and have a great week.